So I don't see you, Susan, yet. Okay. And Rob, I did start the live stream. I just wanted to make sure that we were good.
Yep, seems to be.
Looks like we're live streaming, so that's fine. There we go. I just saw you. Okay, good. All right. All right, Susan, you're here. Oh, sorry, Greg Sweet.
Good evening, everyone. Oh. Greg doesn't want to.
Susan, Susan, can you hear me okay? Because you're a little muted.
I can hear you, yes.
I don't know if you were bringing people in, but
No,
I
I
have
didn't
a
bring
public
anybody.
member that needs to go back as an attendee.
Yep.
So if you let me bring them in so that way we don't both grab them. I think that's what sometimes happens.
Yep. No, I didn't grab anybody because I just got in here.
No, I think I grabbed the wrong person, but
You did.
yeah. So we need to move him back to an attendee.
Yeah. And then you need to bring Paula Whitford in.
Yep. I got a couple people here, some
Christy
school
and Kate.
committee folks.
Yeah, a lot
Okay.
of people. Do you want me to take Greg out while you're bringing?
Yep, that would be perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
And Linda's here. I think I saw Linda. Hi, Linda. How are
I
you?
did see it.
Linda, do you have any school committee people that are not here yet that we should bring in when they come? Or is everyone going to be here for the 6:30 start?
I haven't heard that of anybody who wouldn't be here.
Okay.
See, Sarah Markey's in the
Attendees, let's see. Perfect. Okay. 2, 3.
Hi, everybody. Happy New Year.
New Year.
New Year to you too.
Happy New Year, everyone.
There's Melissa Boyd.
Hi, Melissa.
All right.
All right, I think we're all here. And it is 6:30.
Do we have Raquel? Is Raquel in? I'm sorry. Our CFO?
So I don't see her yet, but if, when she pops in as an attendee, we'll bring her in.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Right. Well, it is 6:30 and I think we can get started with everybody who's here. So I'd like to welcome everyone to this meeting, joint work session of the school committee and the South Kings Downtown Council. It is Tuesday, January 5th, 2021. The time is 6:30. Our first order of business is the pledge to the flag. If Susan, you would please lead us in that, would be great.
I will. Everyone will join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you very much. And this is the first of a few meetings to discuss the capital improvement program for the town. In particular, we're discussing the schools piece of that tonight. So you'll see on our agenda that number 2 is discussion relative to capital improvement program, fiscal year 2021, 2022 through 2026, 2027. And we have an overview by the town manager and school superintendent. So I'll let them take it away.
That's great. So we're going to keep the real broad overview of what a CIP is and capital budget is very short. I will just remind members of council, school committee, and the public that a CIP is a 6-year, in our case, in South Kingstown, we come up with a 6-year plan of major capital expenditures. It's not technically a budget because we only budget on an annual basis, but it is a plan for setting aside money for long-term purchases that we have to make that are larger than we can really afford to make in one single year. The first year of our CIP, our capital improvement plan, becomes our capital budget, which is adopted by the council as part of the operating budget each year. So what we are discussing tonight, we'll discuss at a later meeting, the capital purchases, the plan for purchasing large ticket items for other departments. But tonight we're talking about the plan that the school is proposing for the expenditure of large ticket items over the next 6 years. The schools have got a little bit of a ripple because capital planning has both a state dimension and a local dimension when it comes to education. I'll let them talk about that. But we are not really talking about operating budget except to the extent that the first year of what's being proposed here will be incorporated in the operating budget for the next fiscal year, for next year. That's a relatively small part of what we're going to talk about tonight. Raquel and Linda can remind me, but I believe that the budget last year for the single year operationally funded or operational component of their capital plan was about $160,000. And I think we're proposing, or the schools are proposing 340 or thereabout for next year. So it's not a radically different budget next year than what has been proposed or what was proposed and approved last year. The larger long-term plan includes the bonded project for the facilities improvement and about $7 million worth of improvements over the course of the next 6 years. So that's what tonight's all about. It's just a description of the long-term capital facilities, trucks. There's some computer equipment that we'll talk about tonight, but it's the long-term large expense items. This is not personnel. This is not the annual operating budget, except that whatever is approved by the town council does become part of next year's operating budget. And with that, I'll hand it over to Linda.
Thank you. And thank you for having us tonight. Is it okay if I share my screen to share the presentation? Is that what we were?
That is fine with me.
Okay.
Do you have the ability to share, Linda, or do you need? Okay.
Are you able to see?
I can see it now.
Okay, so I'm gonna present. Sometimes it doesn't look right. So if you could just let me know, does it look like it's in presentation mode?
Looks great.
Thank you very much. Okay, so again, thank you for having us. So I'm the superintendent for the South Kingstown School Department. And with me tonight, I also have our CFO, Raquel Pellerin. And I also want to thank Rob and Zach for their discussions and work with us and ongoing work together on helping us to prepare this. This is not certainly a conversation that happens in one day. It's an ongoing. And I think what you'll hopefully see for us is that when you talk about capital improvement, you're really talking about what should be a long-term program and not certainly a short-term program. So we're going to step through tonight, and Raquel and I will tag team. So she's going to give you a little bit of a summary to start off.
Good evening. This is really pulled from the overall capital improvement program. And really what we wanted to point out is that there are two components to our capital improvement program. One is pay as you go, and those are our smaller projects that are non-recurring in nature. And really what that makes up is our technology and our facility replacement plans. Those are usually funded within the school department's budget, funding from different sources, state and local funds, as well as designated fund balance. Then we have our long-term major projects, and those are usually accounted for on the town side of the budget. And those are our major projects with regards to our bond projects or our major replacement and repairs. As we talked a little bit about 5 minutes ago, that the capital improvement comes from many different sources, and it's accounted for on both sides, but in the end, it really all comes together in this one capital improvement program document. Again, this is a snapshot taken out of the capital improvement program document, and it really gives us a nice summary of the three major sections to it. So in our long-term section, we have the bond project of the 85 million and our long-term repairs and renovations. And then we have our smaller projects, which are our technology and facility replacements. The majority of our ask really comes from the bond project and the renovations, and the smaller part of it is the replacement plans. Overall, it spans 6 years, but it links into our requirements that have to do with the Rhode Island Department of Education. And those requirements are usually span over 5 years. And that takes into account our asset protection program, our master plan, and what that really flows through to is our intent for a necessity of construction if necessary. So when you're looking at it at a very higher level, you have our townwide capital improvement plan, and it's going to flow through to 5-year plans for RIDE, down to asset protection, and then down to something that we talked about before, which is our general maintenance and repairs. And we are required by Rhode Island general law and by RIDE to have 3% of our operational budget go to annual repairs. That 3% is phased in over 5 years. We're right now at 2.5% of the FY22 budget for annual maintenance and repairs. So you might see some of our district-wide projects will actually qualify for that 2.5% of the requirement for general repairs.
So again, as Raquel shared, what we're looking at tonight, we really have broken this down into the 3 categories as shared in the CIP. So again, the facilities improvement project, the general renovations and repairs, and then what we're calling the pay-as-you-go, which ultimately become those shorter technology and district-wide type projects. So that first bucket is the bond, what we're calling the bond, which we're right now in this process. This is the work that has been undertaken by the school building committee. This is also the stage 2 representative of much of the stage 2 submission that we are working on, and will be meeting again together in the coming weeks to discuss with you in greater detail. So this is part of our capital improvement program, though, of course. And ultimately, so I don't have kind of the 85 slide overview for this, but do have the summary of it, which really just kind of highlights the major project components, which is to expand, renovate, convert the current middle school to be the South Kingstown High School, vacate the current high school buildings, expand and renovate Broad Rock so that it becomes a true middle school that would in a team approach serving grades 6 through 8. Also to make smaller capital investments into the 4 elementary schools, which would ultimately be to modernize the library media makerspace, and then ultimately also be able to add grade 5, removing it from the middle school, where it functions in what I'll call an elementary model, because it's one teacher all day long, they're not in teams. And so it does function today, even though it's at Broad Rock, in an elementary model, and we would place that grade 5 at the elementary schools. And then also, as part of the current proposal for stage 2, is to relocate the district administration offices from the administration building to really make space for parking and better parking, to then move it to utilize part of the South Road School. So this is a little bit more complex than just being this bucket of the CIP. It also does entail the stage 2 submission, and I don't mean to be simple about it, but the stage 2 submission really functions for what feels like me a grant submission to the Department of Education. We submit an awful lot of grant requests, some restricted, some more free. This has a lot of restrictions around it. We have been working on it and working under the jurisdiction of the law and of RIDE requirements, the school building authority requirements, and have prepared a submission that we are hoping to gain. We know we'll gain at least 35% if approved, with a likelihood of up to 50% reimbursement if the stage 2 is approved. And also simultaneously, as with many other districts, if they approve that, and sometimes districts don't even ask for approval of stage 2 first, but part of our project, part of this work is to also put forward a special election in the spring for voters to approve or reject a bond referendum for an $85 million project. And again, for that bucket, we will be talking in more detail in the coming weeks with the school committee as they visit this at their next meeting, and then also for a joint meeting, and ultimately for town council to consider for approval. So bucket 2 looks at the general building renovation program. And in this bucket, we are considering those items that are part of what we're looking at this for a longer term, and really what are more of a planning, a committed planning to what we need to do to buildings to move forward. This is, again, part of our plan, part of broken down by building. this is, and then this carries over, and I'm just gonna kind of move forward to describe it a little bit better. So that plan begins in FY23 and carries through to FY27. Its intent is to supplement the bond program, and it supports items like roofing at Matunic, HVAC systems at, so for example, at West Kingston, at Peacedale, at Wakefield, fire alarm systems, and then window replacement and door replacement. So more significant replacement programs that we know need to happen in a longer term project. And Raquel, please join in because I'm kind of
Sure.
plowing through. Sorry.
Sure. So right here, we're focusing a little bit about our PAYGO projects, which we talked about before, which are our smaller projects. They're specific. They usually have to do with replacement plans. Out of the 3.7 million, the majority, 2.9 of it, is really our replacement for our technology as well as our data access points. As you can see here, a focus is student and staff computer replacements, our one-to-one initiative, and the hardware that has to do with the data access points. The remaining of the 3.7 million is really our facility replacements. When we're looking at that, we have our vehicle replacement plans. We have our smaller HVAC rooftop units. We have our security projects and our window and door replacement. So as we talked about before, these are within the general fund. They make up the 3.7, which is PAYGO, and they're funded and accounted for right now within the general operational budget.
So ultimately, what we just looked at, the third bucket, if you will, the pay as you go bucket, that these are more items that they're non-recurring. We call them smaller purchases. They're not larger projects, or along the lines of the laptop replacement program, the wireless access, vehicle replacement. So for example, knowing that we need the snowplow sander replaced to be able to make sure that we are able to do to function as a school department. So these are things we want to make sure that we have the total cost of ownership on, we know the life cycle of things, and we plan accordingly for them. Historically, this has been funded through the operating budget. And we're gonna unpack this for you a little bit more because we are working towards having this become what I feel is more transparent in how we would be funding these kinds of programs. So Raquel's gonna kind of speak to this for us a little bit more, unpack this a little bit more.
So as we've said, that budgeting for our smaller capital projects within that 3.7 have historically been within the general operational fund. So what we tried to do is take a snapshot of the 21 budget that is on our website and kind of point out to you where the revenue and expenses can be found for our capital projects within our operational fund. So you can see that it identifies state aid, local tax appropriation, and what we call designated funds. And really that is our use of fund balance. On the expenditure side, you can look at our capital projects within hardware, equipment, and sometimes they might be in software, and they might be in a maintenance account if they are really actually a smaller project. So if we go to the next screen. So we are also required under Rhode Island general law, all school districts are, to account for report and budget under what's called the Uniform Chart of Accounts, or what we like to refer to in school districts as UCOA. And it's a 32 character code. And what it's really meant to do is provide data to decision makers at a state and local level. And what we want to do is take it a step further. When we talk about how we account for capital funds, it's usually in our operational and general fund. And the major funds within the Uniform Chart of Accounts, I gave some examples here, are the general fund, special revenue fund, which is our grant funds, capital funds, grant and private donations. Other examples are enterprise funds or custodial funds. The shift that we want to make in FY22 is to move the capital expenses that were historically in the general fund over to a designated capital fund. And what we think that will provide is a nice streamline when you're looking at a capital improvement program, and then you're looking at the town budget and a school budget. You can actually zoom right into a capital fund and kind of see a nice trail. Like Linda said before, we think it's a transparent way of reporting. And I just want to point out that school districts have the option to account for capital in many different ways, and everybody does it a little bit differently. But we think for South Kingstown, it really provides a nice flow from capital improvement to budgets to ultimately audited financial statements. And it also aligns with state reporting and what other school districts are doing. So what we provided is a snapshot of the 2019 per pupil. And per pupil, and this can be found on RIDE's website, actually takes into account in the first few columns the total expenditures from all sources, and it gives you a total per pupil. But it also isolates a few different things. It identifies the per pupil that has to do with debt service, and also per pupil that has to do with capital. So if we start to transition to accounting for our capital projects within a capital fund, it would be nice to see a per pupil for capital expenditures. And if you're looking at the many school districts that do it, you can see that there are quite a few that actually account for capital within a capital fund for this reason. So as Linda said, again, it really provides a nice transparent way of reporting our capital projects.
So I know this was a lot. So our goal here, and there was a kind of piece on the agenda that spoke about, what the impact to the operational budget would be. And so what we are trying to do is, while we know that it's budget season and we're, working on that FY22 budget, that we want folks to understand that we will be, you may see a difference in how we present the numbers. And it's not going to be a dramatic, like a light switch on off. We'll step through this during this season. We'll work with the budget subcommittee as we work to look at our revenues and look at how we're spending them, and utilize that uniform chart of accounts that UCOA, structure to our advantage. So over time, we can better analyze how we're spending and make sure that we are transparent with how we're spending it, so everybody else can easily see that as well. So hopefully this piece of this wasn't, meant to confuse anybody. It's just meant to kind of give a little toe in the water for what the impact will be around how we'll be reporting out and analyzing as we move forward together. Because it's one thing to have the plan, so we said, we have this larger $85 million plan. We have the long-term plan over the next really kind of 7 years pushed out. And then we also have the shorter plan for the technology, for the vehicle. But it's critical that folks understand those 3 different buckets, and then how we would be sharing the results and analyzing that together. I do want to just take a couple minutes, because I do have you all tonight, to share really, it's hard to not think about the capital improvement work we've been doing ongoing, and that it really has assisted us during the pandemic. And if asked about it, I asked a year ago, I would never have thought we'd be in the world that we're in today. And our CIP and considering it and considering what it looks like in the future has a significant impact, and has, and so we have been able to provide a program that has given flexibility, fluidity, a hybrid environment, letting our students come in and out as they need or as they have to because of quarantine situations or positive cases. Ultimately, we are always grounded in being safe and feeling safe. Number one at our core for all decisions we make. With that said, we know that our environment matters. So the capital matters, the planning matters, and maybe I've had more of an aha this year than I ever have, as probably a lot of other people. So having spaces that not only maybe look good, feel good, but they are good, their air quality now matters. So we know also that we were able to consider that hybrid environment, letting folks shift at a moment's notice, and they do. Every classroom, the classroom on the right is an in-person classroom, of course, with the teacher, but simultaneously that teacher is streaming to students at home who are using laptops in our CIP program. They're using technology to stream and talk with the students at home and in front of them. And because of the nature of what we're dealing with in the pandemic, any one of us could need to be home tomorrow. And the students do not have to miss a beat. And the staff can still interact with the students if the staff is the one identified as needing to be home. So even on the days that we have a substitute in the classroom, the students, if the staff member is well, they can still access that certified staff member from home because of our technology program. So we were able to, since last year, really made the commitment to the one-to-one. This year, on the left-hand side, our devices coming in, we have rolled our one-to-one right down. We have iPads for K and 1. Grade 2 has laptops. They have new laptops. And the elementary levels for their students for the first time ever. We've always done kind of a hand-me-down replacement planning where the elementaries receive the second hand from the older students. And this year they received newer devices. So we really wanted to standardize, want the equipment to be the same. It's easier to repair, has a longer term life for us. And we know that it would help with an educational perspective because it helps our teachers who are already juggling in-person learning simultaneously with virtual learning, with students on devices, students not on devices, needing to wear masks, quarantine, and project their voices while they're all garbed in PPE. But because of the strong CIP work, and this is why we have this request moving forward, we want to continue with a total cost of ownership, we've done that life cycle plan out, so we have the replacement plan done as we move forward. The other piece that we again talked about as we laid out the numbers, and it's hard not to think about what world we live in today without considering HVAC. So in our buildings, we, for example, had recently replaced the HVAC at Matunic. It's what we call MERV, it supports a MERV 13. MERV 13 is the minimum requirement for the needed air purification that we have to have with COVID. And honestly, don't we want the best air quality we can always have? It's really, if we haven't really thought about that before, we should need to think about it now. We leveraged the outdoors as much as we could as we moved, through the beginning of the school year. I just want to show you. So these are pictures from the fall. These are all pictures of students outside. We did have the goats come to Peacedale at the beginning of the school year. And we tried to stay outside, but now we know we're inside. And so these are the units on the top of the roof. Actually, at the upper left, we had Arden Engineering free. We asked for, the Department of Ed supported us. They gave us in kind, Arden Engineering coming to do an analysis of our HVAC, making sure that we maximized it as much as we could. The filters that we do have in all other buildings do not meet the requirements for the COVID environment of 4 to 6 air exchanges per hour. So what we did to supplement that, and we did that early on in August, and we've leveraged the funds that we've received from the state as we purchased 260 air purifiers to distribute throughout the district. What you see on the left-hand side, on the bottom, is the air purifier. We purchased the filters that go in those. We've placed them in the classroom, and we know that and then we had Arden come analyze our spaces to make sure that we're meeting the proper air exchange. Opening a window is just an add-on. So if we open the windows in the classrooms, it will help. Air conditioning does not help this kind of situation. So air purifiers do, and making sure that your HVAC, whether meets the MERV 13 or not, you still want it maximized to pull in as much fresh air as possible. Again, really outlining the need and the commitment that we need to have for our CIP to be as strong as possible. We did work to leverage funds that were available, even if restricted, even if competitive, from Department of Ed, Rhode Island Commerce, and Rhode Island Health and Educational Building Corporation. We also received donations. So these are additional funds that we've written for, competed for, and the last one at the bottom is one that we've recently submitted. That $9,900,000 essentially grant submission would help to continue to supplement our one-to-one program. So these are the dollars that helped us to get outside, helped us to buy voice amplifiers for our teachers to be able to amplify their voice while wearing masks and shields, helped us to purchase our laptops. We are expanding the one-to-one program to the high school. For grade 9, that's up for replacement. So we're working to expand and utilize grant funds so the burden doesn't sit with the town. So this is just an example of how we've done that, and just trying to show our commitment to you all that we will continue on this, doing this work. This is certainly a team effort. This is not something I do in isolation. This is all of us working together, brainstorming, and having the talents of someone like Raquel on the team to know how to leverage it appropriately. So, so in closing, we know that we have additional time, not only for tonight, but in the future, that we'll be able to discuss together the stage 2. We know the 19th is a tentative date that we've just started. Originally, our OPM had talked about the 18th, and Rob and I knew that was a holiday. And so, we're hoping we can talk about, again, continuing the conversation about the bond in stage 2, even after tonight to January 19th. And so that this is, oh, and I had just thrown like a little glossary at the end, because I know that we use a lot of jargon in education. So I'll try to continue to kind of capture those, that jargon and those abbreviations and share with you all, so that I think it's probably a better practice for us to make sure that we can have all folks understand when we're talking about certain, the certain terminology and what it means. So thank you. That's, I'm happy to happy to take questions, or I'm not sure too if Rob or Zach or Raquel want to share. I'm sure they have much they could offer, much more than I do. I guess in closing, Raquel, I know we talked earlier and we just wanted to make sure that everybody realizes this is a work in progress for us. Not only is the commitment for transparency to the budget or to the capital program, it's also a commitment around our communication, around how we work together with the town so that we can be partners and be as efficient as we can. But ultimately, our decisions are always grounded in doing what's best for kids. So thank you for this tonight, this opportunity.
So just a couple of things that I'd like to highlight before we move on, Mr. President, if I may.
Yeah, hold on, Rob, just 1 second. Kate has her hand up, so I wanted to see if it was related.
I just, Linda, can you go back to the report out where you have it broken out with it was a very small spreadsheet with the capital improvement and the per pupil expenditure. Yeah, here. So this is strictly for reporting purposes, is that correct? Like this isn't, so we have with the reporting difference being like the tech being pulled out and just being highlighted as a capital improvement versus an operating, that's strictly for reporting purposes. That doesn't necessarily impact any sort of like tax transfer numbers, or this is strictly reporting.
That's right. So how, and Raquel can speak to it probably better than I can. I'll just share kind of from a layman's terms, how we report out exactly right, how we code using that uniform chart of accounts. And then we ultimately report all of our data to Department of Education. And then they report out on our behalf. They determine these numbers based upon how we've coded things using UCOA, using the uniform chart of accounts. And then you get that comparison. So this is a public document at the state's website where folks can look and compare and make many assumptions. Ultimately, you peel it back to, well, how is the district coding something? And there are some requirements, of course. There's law around UCOA. There are best practices. There are audits that, with where we've been giving guidance on how we should function. And then ultimately it does come down to what makes sense for a community. And Raquel, I don't know if that makes sense.
Right, because right now you have capital and operational all in an operational fund. What this allows you to do is say, let me just separate the two. And it doesn't mean that we're just separating the expenses without the revenue coming over. It's all there within the operational. You're just isolating the cost in a separate fund. So you'll be able to see just capital expenses and just operational. And I think it's easier for presentation purposes, as well as it will show up in the audit as possibly a separate fund. And this is just one example of when you report it out in a separate fund, RIDE, or Rhode Island Department of Education, actually pulls this data and extracts it and says, let me isolate capital projects, and I'm pulling it from a capital fund, and identifying a per pupil just for capital. If you look now in 2019, you don't see that for South Kingstown because it's extracted right from the way we're reporting it. So this will make it easier. And we'll be able to show capital that's reported on the school side of per pupil. This is just one example of reporting, yes.
Yeah, and these are documents. So I went back a slide, and these are documents from our budgeting where, so we know we have revenue sources broken down in different ways. And what we're, kind of trying to share is that it's really about thinking about those revenues and how you're using them, and thinking about, something that's more of a one-time fund, identifying it as you think about capital, and something that's an ongoing, thinking about it more in an operational capacity. And then, so for example, I've just shared all those grants we're writing, but we're writing grants for one-time funds, because it would be foolish for me to write a grant to then hire a staff member that would not be, then I'd have to put that over into our operation, into our operations and put it on the burden of the taxpayer the next year. That doesn't feel responsible. So when you're looking at one-time funds or funds you cannot necessarily always rely upon, we like to look with them with more project approach and not that commitment. And so it does look, and then as you analyze it and can compare with other districts, it's also something that while we need to make decisions for ourselves first and foremost, but it also, we are compared. I mean, so we do want to know how we're doing as compared to others. And so it's just one more data point to help us make better decisions.
Linda, if I can just point out, if you can go to the other slide with the budget part of it, the next one. I always think about it too, from an end user's point, when you're looking at this document, the way it's presented, you can't really see in the operational budget what exactly is capital and how is it being funded. I think what this will allow us to do is saying, here's the capital expenses and here's the funding streams that come in, whether it's, town and combination of local and state appropriation, as well as designated fund balance. And once we start budgeting for this, you're going to have a really good data set that allows you to compare trends on the capital expenses, as well as the revenue that we're using to support it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Rob?
Yeah, so there are just two things I want to touch on very briefly. The first is harmonization, and I really want to make sure that everyone, the town council and the school committee, both recognize that this is a pretty significant shift. The slide that Linda was showing with the uniform chart of accounts and how other districts are reporting their capital budgets is important. You'll note that South Kingstown is one of the few, I think there are actually only 4 in the state, that don't report to the state and don't therefore have per pupil expenditure for capital projects. So we're going to be harmonizing with other districts, which is important because it gives us a point from which we can compare ourselves to others. But very importantly, for the first time since I've been here, and I've looked at a lot of the historic documents, the town's CIP, the town's planning process for capital improvements will be consistent, not entirely, but will be almost entirely consistent across all departments. The school department will be following the same process for planning, we'll make the same presentation for the plans that we're getting from the Public Works Department. And that historically has not been true. Historically, what we've seen with capital budgets and capital improvement planning in South Kingstown from the school district is that we got a good solid capital budget number, but we haven't necessarily had a great assurance from the department each year that what was sent over for capital projects would in fact be spent on capital projects. Sometimes those monies found their way into other accounts. And what we're seeing here is a commitment to long-term planning and a commitment to capital project discipline, making sure that what we're presenting gets done, actually is where the money ends up. I think those are two really, really important changes in the way Linda and Raquel are presenting their capital projects and their capital budgeting numbers here. So I want to point that out. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on, because I don't want us to forget it. Linda, can you go to your schedule slide? We do have a few scheduling issues that we've got to address, and I don't want to forget them. We don't necessarily have to decide anything right this moment, and I don't want to disrupt the conversation. But there are 2 things on this list that I want to point out. The January 6th meeting tomorrow night does conflict with a school building committee meeting. And there's a request from several folks on the school building committee that this meeting on the 6th be put off to next week for the town council. And the departments, the other departments, the municipal departments have really got no major changes in their CIP this year over what was presented last year. So we certainly can push that off, and I'm going to want to come back at the end of this meeting to poll the council on whether tomorrow night's meeting can be pushed off to next week. And then the 19th is not currently scheduled as a council meeting. This would be a joint meeting of the town council and the school committee to talk specifically about the bonded projects and whether to submit an application to RIDE requesting reimbursement for the bonded projects. As everyone is very aware at this point, the total project cost is $85 million. If we submit an application and that application is approved and we adhere to all of the rules, about $42.5 million of the 85 will come to the town from the state. But there's a lot to talk about around that. And the January 19th meeting is specifically designed to make sure that the town council and the school committee have a chance to talk in detail about that project and whether or not to request $42.5 million worth of state aid for that project. So again, these are scheduling issues that we have to more or less address tonight. I just want to point them out. We have to come back to this, I think. I don't want to disrupt the flow of the conversation on the substance, but I don't want to forget it.
All right, thank you, Rob. Councilwoman Bergner, I see your hand is raised. Is it on the scheduling question?
It is on the schedule, but we can wait. I did have a question on that same slide that Kate pointed out, the one with all the school districts. Just trying to make sure I'm understanding it correctly. So I see that we don't have anything for capital projects there or debt service, and I'm kind of looking at East Providence where I think they're in the middle of their project. So what would ours, the way I understand the big picture, by changing this way of reporting the money spent for capital versus operational and including revenue, it'll provide a better granular level of detail to everyone, correct? Right? That's Linda's nodding. Okay, so I do understand that correctly. So when you look at the debt service, we would have, at the meeting yesterday, the subcommittee on communication, you talked about $2.5 million annually in debt service. So that would be what's there, is we're going to have an annual debt service of $2.5 million. And then about $350,000 in capital projects. Is that the other field about?
Raquel, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, for debt service, that would be so let me just say that there are some municipalities that choose to have debt service accounted for on the school's books. It's not funded through the schools, it's just accounted for. And there are some districts that choose to have only a portion of capital projects accounted for on the school side. And that's what South Kingstown is doing. Right now, we would be accounting for that 300 and something thousand in the 22 budget under capital. So we would be providing a per pupil for the school side capital projects. Looking at all of these different districts, like I said before, they all do it differently. And it's really hard when you're looking at per pupil to get a really good idea, because it's not apples to apples. Using another example, you could have a town buy a vehicle versus a school buy a vehicle, and it's not going to show on the data because the town side or the city side has funded it. And then on another school district, the school district funded it. So it's just a different data point, but we're all moving in the right direction. I think at the state level, we're trying to get better in order to analyze the data. We're not there yet, but getting back to your question, if we transition to having capital accounted for in a capital fund, the data for per pupil will pull from the capital fund, and you will see that in that column.
Yeah, though I do want to make sure that you understand that doesn't mean that the debt service per pupil is going to show up, because we in South Kingstown actually have established about, in 2016 or thereabouts, established a debt service account on the town side. So we account for debt service on the town side. We don't, it doesn't currently show up on the school side. So you're not going to see anything in the debt service column here. You're only going to see the capital expenditure per pupil, not the debt service associated with that capital expenditure.
But it's really not going to change the pure per pupil,
Your equalized net per pupil will not change.
not significantly, right?
No.
It just provides a better detail, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Just want to make sure I understand.
You, Michelle, you have your hand raised?
I'm addressing my question to Raquel and Linda, and I'm not sure which one of you would answer this, but can you indicate like this particular slide that you have up now and a couple of the other slides were not part of the documents that were sent to us? Where can I access those slides? Because to be honest with you, I can't read them. Where can I access these slides?
So for the school committee, so we had an original foundation built of a presentation and then gathering some feedback from, like, just for example, talking with Bob and Zach and Raquel and I about what we should be talking about tonight. And looking at the agenda that was shared with us, we expanded on. So that's what Michelle's saying. Where is we had sent to, I had sent to school committee a original, not so flashy presentation, and then added a few pictures in this and expanded on it. So this should be in your inbox. I sent it earlier this afternoon. So that's for the kind of quick answer, Michelle, is that it should be in your inbox. I'll post it on our website as well for general public, but it should be available to you. Kind of the most recent email from me should have this attached. Hopefully it went through.
Okay.
It's a PDF. I emailed it as a PDF, so you wouldn't have to deal with PowerPoint.
Yeah, I thought I looked at the most recent email, but I'll check again.
I can resend it too. I'm happy to resend it.
Rory, your hand is raised.
Hi, Raquel, just circling back to the carrying the debt service either on the municipal or the school side of the accounting records. It seems to me it'd be more beneficial to carry the debt service on the school side because we know that the debt service will qualify as costs that meet the 3% of the operating budget to be reserved for maintenance costs. Is that correct?
A portion of it, yes.
A portion of it. Can you further on that?
We have to get clarification from Rhode Island Department of Education, what expenditures and what part of debt service qualify for the maintenance requirement. So we have to pass, each year you have to upload the data and RIDE has to verify that each expense qualifies.
Okay, so the debt service goes to paying back the bondholders. So I'm trying to figure out how a portion of that would qualify and how a portion of that would not.
Early discussions are that for debt service, I think only interest qualifies, but we need to get clarification of that because there are districts that are in communication with RIDE that are fighting that. So.
Okay.
We would have to take, we would have to take our own expenses and our own portion when we get there and present it to RIDE and say, okay, does this qualify?
Okay.
Rory,
Do we
if I
know?
may- To your point, though, when the town decided to take debt service onto the town side, the Rhode Island rule with regard to capital expenditures and maintenance did not exist. So you're exactly right. This is a new phenomena. This is a new thing. It is a changed circumstance that may justify a change in the way we do things locally.
Okay. Now, assuming only interest expense qualifies toward that, how much of the 2.5 million annual in debt service will be interest expense for the first 3 years? Do we know that?
We do. Zach, have you got?
Either way, even if it was only interest expense that would qualify, it would make sense strategically to have the debt service carried on the school's accounting records. Does that make sense?
Maybe I can answer. I agree. And there are other districts that say no matter where it's accounted for, whether it's on a school book or a town book, it should still count because that's an accounting practice, but the expense is still the expense. So there's a lot of discussion with RIDE, but I will say, even without that, with using the salaries and benefits for strictly maintenance staff, you really almost hit that target anyway. So we're hitting that target.
Okay, thank you.
Zach.
Rory, just to answer your question, it'd be about a little over 11 million over the first 5 years, in that range, depending on what we get for a rate. But an estimate would be about in the 11 million range for interest.
Got
And
it.
that's before state aid. That would be before any reimbursement of state aid, because state aid would be principal and interest.
Do you know how much on an annual? Should more in the
About
beginning and go down?
the gross would be about roughly about 2.5, almost 2.5.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Zach. And so that brings us sort of to item 3 on the agenda. Is that correct, Rob? Or I guess we can sort of roll status of facilities plan into this implications of the capital improvement plan on the budget.
Linda touched on this, so I think she sort of has set that discussion or questions around that up with her presentation. So
That we kind of took the agenda and just lumped it and stepped through it.
Okay, well then at this point, are there any questions, concerns? Do we want to have sort of a, I mean, it sounds like we're probably going to have a whole separate meeting on January 19th to go further in depth on facilities, but certainly we can have a broader discussion tonight as well. I see Councilwoman Bergner, your hand is up.
I'm going to say I have a commitment on the 19th. So if we keep repeating it, it's going to become what we do. So I just want to put it out there early that Tuesday would be the hardest night for me to do. So.
All right, well, yeah, we can, I think that was just a date that was thrown out there, and we can certainly come to a date that works for all of us. Any further discussion on any of the presentation tonight, or questions about capital improvement planning in general? Councilwoman Bergner, is your hand raised again, or is that from before? Okay. Rory.
I just have a question. One of the slides that showed a 3% escalation cost. I just want to ask, is that what that industry is showing? The trend is moving toward that, or is that just inflation? When I say the industry, I mean the school building development industry.
So I can, the escalation clause, or the escalation costs that we've been working with are closer to 6% on an annual basis. Inflation right now is at about 1.9, if I'm remembering correctly. Zach, if you get a heads up on that, it's about one. No, it's about 1. We're looking at an inflation rate of about 1.2 right now. So it's neither inflation nor the industry escalation clause. It's sort of splitting the difference.
The question is directed at the creator of the presentations. There's a slide that shows the $85 million for the projects with an escalation of 3% built in over 3 to 4 years. Maybe if someone just wants to verify what Rob said, is that accurate?
Are you looking at
One of the slides in the presentation, which shows the $85 million in total project costs.
Yeah.
The slide reflects a 3% in escalation costs, which gets to the 85 million. And my question is regarding the 3% increase.
Oh yeah, I see what you're saying. Yes.
Yes, it's splitting the hairs between inflation and the 6% increase in costs as it relates to that industry.
Escalation is projected for new. It is. It
Okay.
is.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a tiny little note at the bottom of that slide.
One thing that occurred to me, Rob, and forgive me for not knowing the answer already. In the out years, if the school facilities plan goes ahead, the town will be taking possession of the Columbia Street location. Are we planning for capital expenses associated with that, or is that going to be all?
Right. So the answer to the question, there's actually 2 other facilities that are impacted by sort of ripple effects. There's 3 maybe, depending on how you think about it. There's Columbia Street, there's Hazard School, and there's South Road School, all of which are implicated by the facilities improvement plan. None of those become liabilities, if you will. They don't begin to impact the town operations until 2024, really at the earliest. No, we do not in the 6-year CIP for any department carry those as expenses. What we're working toward and what we're hoping, and I understand that hope is not a plan, but we are not planning for having those buildings mothballed. Our operation should not be impacted. We're hoping like hell not to have it impacted, and we're working to make sure that we don't have those buildings vacant. The objective is to hand the keys over to somebody else the day those buildings are vacated, Columbia Street and Hazard. And on the South Road School, we're already carrying the costs on the town side for maintaining that building. And what we're looking to do is switch ownership or custody and control. There's 2 possibilities. The one is that custody and control could go back to the schools and therefore begins to look like an expenditure on the school side. Or the other is that we're in very, very preliminary discussions with a couple of nonprofit organizations to sell the building to a nonprofit organization and take a lease back of a portion of that building of South Road. So what we're hoping to do is not have those buildings in our possession when they are empty. We don't want Columbia Street to be empty and sitting in town hands. We want it to be in the market, sold before the building is vacated. And with South Road School, we're hoping to have a private party take ownership of the building. And if we can structure it right, we may be able to end up with a lease back that allows for the town to take the equity, if you will, out of the building. I'm going to use very, very rough numbers. We don't have a price. We don't have any detail on this, but let us say the building is worth between $1 million and $2.5 million. if we could pull that money out and use it to sort of provide padding on the facilities project, or to make improvements to the recreation facilities associated with or near the schools, that's a way for us to sort of improve the project. And then with a lease back built into the operating budget for the schools, an annual rental rate that helps the nonprofit organization deal with management of the mortgage associated with the purchase price. That's a lot, but my point is, no, we are not planning to have it as a capital liability. We're hoping to be out from under those liabilities before we need to do anything with them. Now, if as we progress, we're finding it difficult, and by the way, in our conversations with developers, we've not had anyone say, there's no way, Jose, this is not going to work. We've got nothing but very positive feedback on the prospects of disposing of both of those buildings, or all three of those buildings, I should say.
Thank you. Councilwoman Bergner?
Yeah, can we go back to the slide that Rory McEntee was talking about, the slide where the escalation of cost is estimated at 3%? And I was looking at the slide, and then Rob, you had said you sort of split the difference between inflation and what?
I was describing it as being a point somewhere between inflation and
Right.
What the escalation cost is. The escalation cost that we've been working with on the school building committee and in discussions with the architect is 6%. That's just the number that has consistently been used for the last several years. I don't know what 3 is other than less than 6.
So typically you would estimate that costs would increase at 6% a year for each of the years, but we're underestimating that. So that I'm just trying to understand why we would underestimate something that people are telling us that it's at 6 and we're going to go at half. And then, so then I'm just thinking, will we not have enough money? And then this project that is already at the top of the limit with the least amount of return, then we'll be then looking to like, what can we jettison off and continue just to meet that 6%? Am I understanding it correctly?
Potentially, and I think the best way to address that question is for us to go back to RGB, go back to the project manager and Peregrine, and ask them to give us the cost estimate, the escalation number that they would recommend, and report back when the council and the school committee have their joint meeting. But yes, potentially 3 is an understatement of escalation. It's potentially.
So we look like we could be underestimating the cost of the project. This looks like it was taken from something else. Is this part of the stage 2? Is because it looks like it was like an insert, because that's why it's so blurry.
It's part of the, so there's actually the capital improvement program.
I can't hear you.
Am I muted? No.
No, you're just kind of garbly.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I don't know. And my lights went off and I'm a mess. It's part of the capital improvement program report. So it's part of the submission. So we gave a presentation tonight, but as Bob shared, like it's actually, the CIP for the town is a very large document, and the backup and the pieces that go to that are created and presented and worked on to get to this point. So we just did a presentation of what is really a much larger report. And I know you're going to have additional reports from other departments too, as you step through it.
So Deb, though, I think there's an important caveat there. If what I understood Linda to just be saying is this comes out of the CIP portion of the submission to the state. So the 3% escalation may in fact be a number that RIDE has built into that portion, not the major capital investments. It's the smaller projects that roll into the $7 million portion. I just don't know the answer. We're going to have to get clarification from the producer of that information, which is going to have been RGB. We're going to have to get clarification.
I just feel like we need to have a very sharpened pencil here, because being off by you
3%.
know, you're gonna, it goes up by $3 to $6 million is, you know,
Yep.
is a lot in a project that we're at the max for everyone's, you know, capabilities. And just trying to understand, like, I understand where Rory was going with this, but I think we're underestimating the escalation costs, and we should definitely get a tighter number and work with that.
Melissa Boyd.
Thank you. In looking at those numbers a little bit more, trying to dig in, I'm not sure who the question should be addressed to, but also along the lines of wanting to understand sort of contingencies, if this is truly a long-term plan and knowing that things will change. This is a drafting process where we'll have several meetings, knowing that there are folks on the call who helped to draft this, as well as the building committee representatives. At what point is there a conversation? Is there a conversation of what would happen if our stage 2 is in jeopardy, or if our bond doesn't pass? As a community, are there conversations about opportunities for bucket 1 to become bucket 2 to reinvest in our schools? Is this a conversation that has happened, or do we have examples of other school districts where folks have been able to make this switch in a long-term capital plan?
So I can kind of start the conversation. I'm sure Raquel and Rob and Zach, you know, have experience and have conversation. I've always, and in fact, you can go back to, I think it's April's school committee meeting. We took a look at the costs that we had with respect to the school facilities if we weren't going to move forward. So kind of if you're thinking about, I'm going to be really kind of simple in my language, so I don't mean to insult, but we just said, like, what are all the major projects we need to do for all of the buildings if there's not a plan to move forward with stage 2, but these problems still exist? And so what does that look like for each site? So I believe that's at the end of April in 2020, we actually presented a document that's you can see it right now available. And because I often go back to it to look. So we have taken a look, we presented to school committee to say, like, this is what we own, no matter what. We have this. It's either going to be addressed as part of a larger stage 2 project, or we're going to have to do some kind of planning moving forward. And if you think about that middle bucket I spoke about when we talked about, well, we'll work on the fire alarm systems, or we'll work, that's kind of how those pieces would be addressed. So we just said, like, for example, if you're thinking about your own home, oh, I know the roof needs to be replaced, and I know I have a bathroom that needs to be upgraded. That's my long-term work that needs to happen. When is that going to happen? Is that, no, that can't all happen in 1 year. So we're going to have a 5 to 6 year plan ultimately is where we land, between kind of working with Department of Ed and looking at our local expectation. And we would take what we need to do and plan it out. So the kind of priority 1 and priority 2 areas that we would need to look at are identified from the school department. Almost from my selfishly, I need to know. I kind of to sleep at night, you need to know what those things are. But if this doesn't move forward, this stage 2, and it doesn't move forward with respect to the bond, then yeah, you go back to that list and then work on what your long-term planning is. The community, when I've not been here that long, maybe not so much a rookie anymore, but there's not been a parallel detailed plan. So I think we've just kind of put all of our energy into, let's work through this stage 2. Let's be committed to, this is the project where we want to head. The town CIP reflects that. But I think it's just important for us to understand, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't mean all the problems that we have go away. And we do need to address those problems and have a plan for that. So very good question, and one that maybe haunts me. So I'm glad that you asked it. I don't know if Rob wants to add to that.
So just in very general terms, I mean, a capital improvement program, a capital improvement plan is just a list of projects and a schedule for funding them. The list of projects will change if the Rhode Island Department of Education decides not to provide 50% reimbursement for the project. It'll have to change because $85 million without state assistance is not something we can do. So we will have to change the list, and the schedule will have to change. If we don't have state support, the schedule of payments and the schedule of projects will have to change. But you know, Linda's right. There aren't two lists and there aren't two schedules at this point.
Thank you both. I appreciate that. I certainly understand the process in capital planning and in the work that I currently do, and acknowledging that. I think for me as one of the newcomers and to the community folks who might be listening, I think there's about 20 folks to know that there is flexibility in this process and ongoing planning and input opportunities, as well as knowing that list will change potentially based on what does happen, and certainly on that level of reimbursement that becomes a potential reality. So I think that's good for folks to remember going forward. Thank you.
Okay, Councilwoman Bergner.
So I'm looking at the slide that says major project components. And so having been to a bunch of the building committee meetings and hearing lots of different things, a number of projects related to the bond aren't included in the bond, and the funding for those things, where is that accounted for? Like, for example, the millions of dollars that you'll need to do the fields, or the millions of dollars to relocate the admin building, whatever, 300,000 or whatever the amounts are. Where are those accounted for in this project? You know, because I personally feel, you know, whatever, Rob, you said yesterday that the 1990 building, you know, the admin building is at the end of its usable life. And I'm thinking there are a lot of homes in town that are more than 30 years old, you know, 100-year-old homes, people live in here. So I just didn't know where the money, my question is, where does the money come for the projects that are not funded? Because there is, the 85 million isn't going to cover all of that. So I didn't see that accounted for in anything. Did I miss it?
No, they're not. They're not in the CIP as designed. Again, this is sort of a variation on Abel's question. You know, South Road School becomes problematic for the school department if we can't find a buyer, or if we can't find a mechanism for offsetting the costs of renovation for the school administration. It becomes a problem. But if we can find a financing mechanism that's acceptable to the town council and is acceptable to the schools, then that off CIP, that off budget item will pay for itself. If we can get a purchaser and we can get capital equity out of the building, and we can enter into a lease arrangement, then there isn't an expense that isn't going to be covered. It'll be covered by the purchase of the property. We have a lot of work to do. This is not, I'm not suggesting, I don't want to, you know, give anybody the impression that there's not going to be expenses that aren't, that we're going to have to cover. There may be, but we are hoping to develop a financing mechanism that does not require the town to go out of pocket for the renovation of South Road School. With regard to the fields, if the purchase price is substantial on South Road School, it might be possible to generate sufficient revenue to significantly contribute to the fields. Again, if we're looking at $1 million to $2.5 million worth of value, and again, those numbers are very wide. That range is very broad because all we can do is look at comparably sized commercial property in town. But if we can generate $1 million, then we may have enough to do renovations plus some improvements to the fields. The fields have also been contemplated as something, because it's not reimbursable from RIDE, something that would have to be dealt with through fundraisers, through attempts to find revenue sources, grants, what have you, other than either town funds or RIDE reimbursement. RIDE will not reimburse on South Road. RIDE will not reimburse on the fields. We're gonna have to find creative ways to pay for those things. We are looking for a creative way around South Road. We think we may have one. We're not there yet, but we're working it. And we know we're gonna have to find a way to pay for improvement to the fields, other than those fields that are absolutely essential to the project. There's actually some field work that will be reimbursable, but not most of it.
Yeah, it just, to me, it sounds like we're, well, I guess when the South Road transferred back to the town, it's now in the care of the control of the town. So what's the process for returning it? I think there isn't just, hey, we need it, we'll take it back now. So,
That's correct.
right, and then, I mean, somebody has to authorize using the school to fund the project, and I'm thinking that somebody is the town council.
That's correct.
Has to take that. Is that a separate, I don't know, votable item?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, the disposal of and control of town property is at the purview of the town council. The town council would have to approve a sale, whether it's to the Boys and Girls Club or a nonprofit organization of some other ilk, or for condo development. If the town council wanted to sell the property, they'd have to approve that sale. If the town council wanted to give custody to the Department of Public Works, you'd direct that happens. And if the town council wants to give it back to the schools, you'd do that as well. So part of the answer to if we got to a scenario where the only thing that could be done is to give the property back to the schools, if that were the only way to make a project work, unless the school department can find the revenue in their operating budget or can find grants, they'd have to move into that building as it is and plan for its improvement over time. It is perfectly, it's within code. It has been used as a school as recently as 9 months ago or 8 months ago. It's not a building that needs to be brought up to code. It's a current building.
So really the only way to fund the outside projects is to sell. We're basically forced, this project is at the high end, it's more than we can afford, so we're looking for every way to generate revenue to fund the things that aren't covered.
I will say that South Road has been discussed in the community as a building that would be sold. There's been discussion for many years about possible nonprofits, and there's been discussion about other possible uses. An important thing to know about South Road is that where we draw the property line is also completely up to the town council. That property is just one large parcel, South Road and Curtis Corner. So you can make that a 34,000 square foot building with 3 acres. You can make it a 34,000 square foot building with 10 acres. The council has a lot of flexibility as to how you peel off a piece of property for sale or disposal.
Although it backs up to the fields, it backs up to the discourse, it backs up to.
Right. You definitely disrupt things if you're going 10 acres for sure. You're going to start, eating into things that people rely on.
Emily Comiskey.
Rob, could we have an update of where you are in terms of discussions with the Boys and Girls Club? Because I know that they've come to visit the site a few times and that they've expressed a serious interest in moving forward with a lease of or a purchase with a lease back to the town.
Yep. They are currently in the
If we could just have an update, that would be great.
Yeah, my understanding is that they're currently in the process of doing a operating budget analysis. What will it cost them to own and operate the building? And what is that going to generate in terms of revenue? So they're doing a cost of holding analysis at this point.
Okay, and then just to Deb's point, because I think we just need some clarification for everybody here. When it said that we're at a point where we're at a project that we can't afford and won't be able to move forward with unless there are sales of buildings. I haven't heard that before. What I've heard you say is that actually we're in a really good place because of when the $85 million point was initially discussed, bond rates were much higher, and now we're at a place that we're actually in a very comfortable zone. So I just think that we have to be really careful to be clear and accurate about where we are, in that we're, especially as we're moving forward in discussions about a submittal within the next month, that we have the affordability of the project has not changed at all. If anything, we're in a better place than we were. So if you could just maybe clarify that so everybody here has sort of accurate information about that, that would be great.
So just very generally, I can provide some not so specifics, but some general sense of what has changed. When we built this budget 3 years ago now, the assumption was that we would be paying 4% interest and that we'd be bonding $85 million at 4%. We have seen rates go much lower recently, and our financial advisor has told us that it is fine, it is reasonable, it is prudent to assume a 3.25% interest rate. Rates are actually much lower than that. However, our advisors do not feel comfortable saying go lower than 3.25. 3.25 is reasonable, it's safe, it's prudent. Rates are actually lower than that. If we were to bond the $85 million at 3.25 instead of 4%, we will see a significant debt service because we have less interest payment each year. It's about $400,000 less in interest payments. So we save about $400,000 today if we were to go to market today. Now that's another important caveat. We cannot really predict where we're going to be a year and 2 years out. If we were to do it today, we'd be about $400,000 less than what we were assuming we would be 3 years ago. So when we say, there's an escalation cost on construction, that is absolutely true, but there's other moving parts. And at least the interest rate has moved in a favorable direction.
All right, are there any other comments or questions among panelists? Councilwoman Berger.
Yeah, just one more about, I know the high school at Columbia Street, they've done a number of renovation projects over the last few years. And are we getting some sort of housing aid from the state or RIDE that we would then lose once we close Columbia Street? And how would that affect the payment of those projects? Am I making sense? We renovated the different aspects of the high school, painting, tile, all that kind of stuff.
Raquel, you're probably in the best position to tell us where we are on the schedule of payments on.
And would we lose? What will we lose in terms of housing aid?
I have to go back. I don't really have the history for prior years, but I can definitely look into that and discuss it with RIDE and get back to you.
But generally speaking, that's a very serious question. I mean, that's a big deal for us. We have to make sure that we haven't committed to maintaining an asset that we are abandoning.
Right, because I can't remember what school. I think we were going to lose housing aid when we talked years ago about closing a different, I can't even remember if it was Curtis Corner or years and years ago. And that was one of the things that the former town manager, Steve Alford, said, that we were going to lose housing aid on some of these things. So that's a big, big loss. So we definitely would need to see that, because that's going to affect all of these other things. So
Your question is asking about a revenue source. Are we going to lose revenue? Right?
Well, are we going to have to repay because RIDE is contributing toward the repayment of a debt? The numbers are going to be relatively small no matter what, because we don't have any huge projects outstanding. But the HVAC for the high school is the one that I'm worried about as I think about this question.
That would be good to have an answer for when we get to the meeting where we're talking about the stage
Yes,
2.
we'll have that. I mean, we're not going to be in jeopardy of losing millions of dollars, but yeah, there could be a significant chunk. We need to look into it.
All right. Any further questions, or Paula, were you
Like
raising?
Paula's trying to raise her hand. Yeah. Let's see.
I'm confused. I'm trying to figure out how housing affects or any of this.
So it's a terrible nomenclature. It's a terrible way for people to describe it. When they say housing aid in the schools, what they mean is assistance for occupancy by students. It's not actual housing. It's just the way they describe having a student in a classroom. They house them in a classroom. It's a terrible way to use. It's a terrible reference, but that's the way they describe it.
Okay, thank you. It is terrible.
All right. If there are no other comments or questions from council members or committee members, then we can move on to item 4 on the agenda, which is other matters of interest and concern, which is really just public comment. The way the rules work with public comment is it's really just commentary. It's not really a conversation, a back and forth. However, we often open up. Rob, did you have something you wanted to add first?
Just one thought, and that is you can also deal with the scheduling item here, and you're not going to have a OMA problem with the school committee participating in the scheduling discussion. So there's one item that would involve the school committee, and that is a joint session between the school committee and the town council to talk about the school budget. The 19th has been flagged as a potential conflict for one member of the council. The 20th would be just as good for staff. So if the council or school committee have a preference, we'd be happy to do it. The only thing that I would point out is the town council is currently scheduled to have a vote to approve or reject submission of the stage 2 at its 25th, January 25th regular meeting. So if that's going to hold, then this meeting should happen before that.
So if we're looking at a weeknight on that week of the 17th there, the 20th, the 21st, or the 22nd?
The 21st is a budget subcommittee meeting, so that night would be out for school committee.
All right. How does the 20th look for most everyone?
I could do the 20th.
Okay.
All right, I'm not seeing anybody opposed to the 20th, so let's pencil that one in or pen it in.
Wednesday night, Abel.
It is a Wednesday night.
Rob, is that the zoning board's regular meeting that night? Are we going to have a conflict with Zoom licenses?
We have 2 licenses, and
Okay.
needed to use
Okay.
the schools, we could do that as well. So we should be.
Okay.
Yeah, we
Okay.
could post.
All right, great.
Could we do a 6:30 start and rather than a 7? Is it, I didn't kind of like the 6:30 start. It's not, that could be a long meeting.
I like the 6:30 start as well.
I also like the 6:30.
6 would be even better. It's nice not to be up until midnight.
All right, is there anyone opposed to a 6 o'clock start? All right. 6
I
o'clock,
can't do a 6 o'clock start on a Wednesday.
Okay.
but you can do,
I teach till 5:40.
okay. 6:30 is workable though.
I can do 6:30, just not 6 o'clock. Thank you.
6:30 it is. And then, that sounds good. And then there were a couple other scheduling questions. We could leave those till after public comment. Okay. And so, as I was saying, public comment is, directed at usually the topic of the evening, which is of course the capital improvement program, the schools portion of that in particular. If there is a question from the public and town staff, school staff can answer it, they will take that opportunity. It is good to note that school committee members are not really allowed to engage in the public comment phase because of their own separate rules. But town council members, can respond as well if there's a question that they want to answer. All right, with that being said, I'll open it up here for other matters of interest and concern. And so if you're listening, no, I don't see anybody listening on a phone. So just raise your hand and we'll take you in order that you raise your hand. We have Greg Sweet.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
On the capital improvement plan, the $7 million of additional work that needs to be done above the 85 million, you're going to be taking it out of that 2.5 or 3% that you set aside for maintenance on the school. Is that correct?
Most likely, yes, that would be attributed to that. Yes.
Where will the money come from then to do the maintenance on the school? Or schools, actually, not school.
Well, so those are projects that are pushed out and we know that they exist and need to be done. So as we would, again, as we talked about earlier, as we would look at kind of the one-time funds, how we reallocate funds to spend, looking at the revenue stream and what expenditures would make sense to use. I'm used to using things like fund balance, but I'm not, and then we would continue with the ongoing maintenance. But each year we do build the budget fresh. So each year we would be analyzing what the priorities are. It is important though for us to identify what the priorities are in terms of our buildings, and that's what the goal of that portion of the presentation was, is to know, over the long term, what is coming and what we need to plan for. So I don't have all the details outlined for all maintenance in, 5 years out from now, but we know that those items need to be on our radar as we plan for that 5 to 7 year length. Those are important items. if that
I
makes
was just thinking, if you allocate your whole maintenance budget towards doing the projects that are needed at all the other schools or all the schools, I just don't see where the maintenance money would come in. Like if you had to replace motors or filters or, I mean, all the general things that happen naturally year in and year out, where does that money come from?
Maybe I can take that question. That's part of the general operations of the school district, so it would be within the general operational fund.
Then let's say we're not doing any work with the schools, and you have to take that 3% of your budget. Where does that money go then? Where would that normally go?
So each year we have to report out that from our expenditure side, that we're spending or expending a certain percent of the operational budget on general maintenance and repairs. So that is a requirement to generally maintain the buildings, and it would be part of the operational fund, which is funded through town appropriation and state aid.
Greg, there's one other important thing to note about the $7 million CIP component, and that is that it's a list of items submitted to the state for possible reimbursement. You have to, the schools have to submit a list of projects that they may be seeking state assistance with. So you don't need to actually do the $7 million, but if you hope to receive any state funding on those projects, you have to list them. The plan, the 5-year plan in the case of the state CIP is flexible. They don't have to do all of the work that's identified, but they have to have all of the things that they seek or hope to seek reimbursement on listed. So the lists tend to be broader, they tend to be longer on the state CIP because you don't want to have something that you anticipate you may have to do that isn't on the list, because if it's not on the list, the state will not provide reimbursement for it. So that list is probably longer, I shouldn't speak for Raquel and Linda, but is probably longer than it would be if the state rule wasn't, you have to put it on the list or you can't get money from us.
And the other question I had is, and I don't know who brought it up, but to me it's a pretty valid point. Because it's an addition, you're going to run into things, an addition and a rehab. I mean, there's no question about there's going to be things you're going to run into that are not anticipated. Where does the extra money come from to cover the unknowns?
So there is contingency built into the budget. I can't remember off the top of my head what that number is at this point, Greg, but there is some contingency built into the budget. And then the design of the Curtis Corner project was that because you were working with a code compliant, currently being utilized school, you'd have flexibility to shift away from doing components of the project. It's value engineering that kicks in if you have to make reductions. The same thing would be true in any renovation project. If we had an $85 million project that we're going on with Columbia Street as the focus for the high school, if you ran into contingencies, there's no more money for it on Columbia Street either. So you'd have to just reduce the scope of the project in that case as well. It's scope reduction is the answer, Greg. Some contingency, and if you exceed the contingency, it's scope reduction.
Because a huge cost that's going to be coming up is, and they may have already come out with the guidelines, I'm not sure, to be honest with you, but for outside air, for all of the, it's going to be in all the schools. It's not going to be just in the junior high. I can assure you that's going to be a huge expense. And then the utilities after the fact, it's going to be extremely costly. And I don't think people realize how much more that's going to be than what they're anticipating. You know, where would that money come from?
projects that we listed today do account for the upgrades in air. The current $85 million does account for upgrade in air for Curtis Corner. But then we know moving forward, we need to make sure that we account for it at Peacedale, for example, or at West Kingston. And so that's in the building renovation plan. And that is, you're absolutely right. We know we live in a different world than we did a year ago. We know air quality matters, and especially in schools. It's what's allowed us to stay in school. We can't live off air purifiers in each room for the rest of our lives. So we do have that in our plan accounted for today.
Okay, because the thing I was thinking was Matunic cost, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was like $1 million to upgrade the heating and cooling system. Well,
Yes.
when that was upgraded, I don't think it really took into consideration the COVID.
It does actually meet the COVID requirements. It's a MERV 13, and that does meet the requirements. The trick at Matunic is the MERV 13 filters that you use in the HVAC system are not available. So it's now become an inventory problem in the nation for those MERV 13 filters. So we are actually still leaning on air purifiers at Matunic when we shouldn't need to, because it has proper HVAC. It just, we can't get the filter if to put into the systems, and we've had them on order since June. So we are, but you're right, but it does meet it's only, you know, 1.5 years or 2 years old, and it did meet the requirements that we're under. And as I shared earlier, I've had Arden Engineering come in and analyze and do a custom report, pulling out specific classrooms in each, doing measurements and climbing on the roof with them and making sure that we were utilizing the HVAC systems we currently have to the maximum capacity. But we knew Matunic was going to be the best, and we knew that it was going to meet the requirement. But again, without the filters, you cannot do that. And you can't put a MERV 8 or 9 filter in a MERV 13 system and get that same air purification. So typical
That's correct.
COVID. Typical
That's
COVID
correct, but the
issue.
MERV 13 is a different, is different than taking in outside air. So if Matunic is all set up to take in the outside air, and that's fine, then you can make the assumption that West Kingston is going to be $1 million, Wakefield will be $1 million, and you guys have set aside, I think it's maybe $500,000 or less per school for updates. So you're already short there.
Right, so it's not part of the $85 million project, but it was presented tonight as part of the building renovation project. And we would do a project like that. We would split it out over long term and do a building a year. And it is identified in the presentation as air. I'm trying to look at this and talk at the same time, I'm sorry. But we identify it over the long term. I'll find an example. So new ventilation system is identified at Peacedale in FY23, and it's a cost of 1.298. So it is expensive to consider for each site, but it is essential as we move forward. And what you're doing with the HVAC systems is you're pulling in the outside air into that's the most important aspect, you're right, is to make sure that you have that outside air coming in and you're filtering the air that the children are breathing.
Yeah, just on this, there's a lot that, as I'm not going to get into it, but there's a lot that's not being considered, and it's going to be costly, and I think it's going to be more costly than what you think it is. I just hope there's enough cushion in there to take care of these extra expenses. That's it. Thank you for listening, and Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year, Greg. Is there anyone else who would like to speak from the public? All right, very good. Any final comments here at the council committee level? Councilwoman Bergner.
I couldn't raise my hand quick enough. Can the PowerPoint slides that we were given, the last ones, be available to the community at some point? And where would they be so that people can find them? Because
Yes. So they either already been posted or will be posted to Clerkbase as well as wherever the school department is posting them.
okay, perfect.
All right, well then I think the only thing remaining are just some discussions about scheduling a couple meetings for the town council. School committee members, you're welcome to sit around and watch us talk about that. But if you're not interested in that, you're free to go now. It's been a pleasure. See you again.
Thank you.
New Year.
Have a good night.
Everyone.
Good night.
So,
So there are two dates. Tomorrow night's CIP conversation does conflict with a school building committee meeting, and the school building committee had as part of its objective for that meeting tomorrow to deal with its leadership vacuum. The committee is concerned, members of the committee are concerned that they need to, just make sure that that committee doesn't fall apart after the election, and that it's able to start planning toward sort of post-submission stuff. If there's going to be a submission in that application, there's going to be some work on sort of re-gearing the committee because the work changes after submission. It needs to start thinking about actually managing a construction project as opposed to helping design a facilities plan. So that meeting tomorrow night, the CIP for the town, the council's had the chance to look at the CIP. The CIP for the town departments, the municipal departments, is not really any different than last year's. We're sort of continuing with last year's CIP without significant modification. Zach, can you think of anything major that that is in the CIP next year that we need to highlight here? I mean, I think my characterization that there's nothing is correct, but I don't want to make that blanket assertion without sort of checking myself.
No, I don't want to diminish what the department heads have put together.
No, it's a major,
and requested. There are some major projects, but it's pretty much status quo from last year. So to answer your question, I can go back and look and see if there's any huge projects, but a lot of it's equipment based. It's public services and public safety
and
recreation.
We're actually coming in with a recommendation for a CIP on the municipal side that is lower than last year's CIP. The cost is less for the capital budget, and the overall CIP is slightly lower, if I'm recalling the number correctly.
That's correct.
So it's not, there's nothing big or controversial that requires immediate attention. If this conversation were to happen next week, I don't think anyone or anything is prejudiced. So our recommendation would be to move that meeting tomorrow, the CIP discussion, to a day next week. And, it could be any day. You've got a council meeting on Monday night, but Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday would all be fine with staff. We do have a planning board meeting on that Tuesday. So if the council wants to avoid being scheduled opposite the planning board, then Tuesday is an issue, but otherwise there's no other issues.
Rob, I just can't do the 14th,
Okay.
but I can do the Wednesday before.
13th is a possibility. February 13th work
Yep.
for everybody else.
13th is good. 6:30. Or 6, if the town staff like 6. I mean, it's a long day, so.
Is anybody opposed to 6 o'clock?
So it's Colleen. I just want to mention that the community forum on the climate crisis
Yes.
facility committee is that Wednesday as well.
That is true.
It's a different Zoom account, right? We can set that up differently. I just mentioned that for you. That's all.
Yeah, that's a 5:30 begin.
Correct.
Okay, so still, do people have a issue with a 6 o'clock start time potentially? Or is that preferable to 6:30? Input?
So if you go to 6:30, then anyone who wants to attend that sustainability forum would be able to do so, I think.
I was looking forward to that climate change forum. So if we could do 6:30, that would be better. Yeah, I really would like to tune into that.
All right. I don't think anybody has a problem with 6:30. Let's make that.
I will point out that I think you're possibly going to get clipped on the end of that one too, even at 6:30, but much of the meeting will be before that. An hour anyway is going to be a good chunk of it.
And just a reminder that the Monday meeting starts at 6. Everyone, we were going to do that legal training with Mike Ursillo. So
That's correct. And then the other item, so I'm sorry, was that the consensus at 6:30 on Wednesday, the 13th? CIP? Good. And then the other item is this Saturday, we had planned our discussion on goals and objectives. The morning does run straight into a conflict with the Hassenfeld Institute's morning session for that Saturday. So it's either reschedule it or miss part of the Hassenfeld thing. Whatever the council's preference is, we're happy to do goals and objectives a weeknight. We're happy to move it to another weekend. We're whatever you want.
Deb Bergner, are you doing that on the 9th? Are you participating in that?
Yeah.
Okay, I am too.
It's a good session. I recommend it. I think that it's worth attending. I participated last year. I thought it was really, it's worthwhile. So you can move it to another Saturday, although the next Saturday we've already had an expression from a member is not available. But 2 Saturdays later, which would be, what is that? 23rd is a possibility.
Rob, is it problematic if we push this into February?
It's not. Really, this is the council setting the goals and objectives for our budgeting. The manager's budget proposal comes on March 1st. If I get some guidance from the council, first week of February, we're going to be fine. I can make that work. I mean, we're not going to radically change things, I imagine, like the housing policies that have been high priority. So unless there's anything that anyone thinks is a big shift in budget priorities that is going to take staff some time to digest and shift on, February, the first week, should be plenty of time for us to work around or work through any priorities that are different. Unless they're radically different, I think that's fine.
I'm good with first week of February, weeknight.
So there's the 1st, which would be a Monday.
If we're that far out, then I would rather choose just not a Tuesday. So Monday the 1st or Wednesday the 3rd, because I think that's probably better.
I'm good with either.
Yeah, the 1st works best for me.
I have no preference.
Monday the 1st, maybe early.
Yeah, this
So
is,
the problem with early is, with me, is folks that want to participate that are trying to get families fed.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we can put everything at 6 o'clock, but I think we're doing a disservice to the residents.
No, I would say 6:30.
I think 7 o'clock is much better for residents to be able to get their selves out of work mode, you know, if they have families to feed, and then they can participate. 6 o'clock to me is problematic.
So I'm saying 6 o'clock very selfishly, because I have someone to come in and get my kids off after. I agree with you, Deb. I think, you know, without being selfish, I do agree that 7 o'clock is probably better for the public.
I will note that with the goals and objective meeting, it's mostly sort of a internal discussion to the council what our goals and objectives are. It's not typically a big public input meeting, but certainly still do 7 o'clock.
I want to have it whenever we think the most people are going to be tuning in.
Yeah, I think for a matter of transparency's sake, 7 o'clock would be better.
Sounds like we got a time.
2121 at 7 o'clock. All right. Great. I will note on scheduling stuff that we've had some inquiries over. We haven't got any specific requests at this point, though we're expecting them to be coming for some joint meetings with boards and committees. The planning board and the council have not met recently. The Economic Development Committee is planning to discuss a request to meet with the council sometime in the near future to talk about the 300th anniversary of South Kingstown and a project around the Saugatucket Park project, which they've been focused on for a while now. And there was one other older request or older inquiry that is slipping my mind right now, but there are a couple of boards and committees that would like to have some work sessions with the town council. And the other item that I would like to touch with you, since we're talking about scheduling, is we had last year started a port out by each board and committee, and during COVID that got blown up. But I'd like to get that back on the agenda if the council doesn't object. I'd like to get a board or a committee to come to each council meeting and report out on what they've been doing. It's your meeting, so I don't want to do that without your input, but I do think that it would be beneficial for the council to have a 5-minute, 10-minute report from each of the boards and committees. You'll remember we had the Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee do that. I think the Economic Development Committee made a report. And I think it's useful to just let folks know that, and have a conversation, have the council have a conversation with them about the work they're doing. Even if it's not a full-blown work session, just have some representative, the chairman or somebody come in and explain what they're up to. So with your approval or your okay with that, I'm gonna have Susan start putting that back on the agenda.
Yeah, I always enjoy hearing from those commissions and boards. One that we haven't heard from yet is that Affordable Housing Collaborative.
Yeah.
And I know that we all have a strong interest in that topic,
Yes.
so prioritize them, that might be good.
That's actually the third that had slipped my mind. They also have got stuff that they'd like to do a work session on.
Great. Oh, yeah, if we want to do a whole work session with them. Yeah,
we actually are very close to some major to having them to the point where some of the things that council talked about with them 2 years ago now are ready to be acted upon. So it might make sense to do that.
So is Affordable Housing Collaborative, will that be the first one, and will that likely be in February?
We can do it that way. Yep. Any particular meeting, which of the two meetings, any preference? Because we'll just let them know that they're on deck.
How about the 11th?
February the 11th?
Yep.
Okay.
It's February 11th.
It's a regular council session. So that.
No, no. February 8th is a regular council meeting.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at January.
Calendar, Rory, you're in January.
I'm like, what?
How about the 8th?
Yeah, February 8th or February 22nd. Those are your regular meetings in February.
So yeah, I think we'd prefer as early as possible. If there is like some work product that they're in the last stages of preparing and they don't have it ready for the 8th, then I think we could obviously push it to the 22nd.
I think they're gonna have work product for you. So on the 8th.
Okay.
So a work session starting at, I know we just said 7 is better starting, but if we're gonna do it in conjunction with a regular meeting, it's really got to be about an hour before that meeting, 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
Yeah, are you talking about having a work session with them or just having them be the group that does the presentation that night?
We could do either one.
I think with the Affordable Housing Collaborative, it's a big enough topic and there's enough work that's been going on that we probably need more than just a presentation in the middle of the regular meeting.
But if they're going to do some sort of a work session, shouldn't we include the planning board? I mean, that's where these things get worked through. So I don't want to slight the planning board if we should be including them. Maybe we should just have the presentation and then, or invite the planning board to the work session.
You could do a joint session with the planning board and the Affordable Housing Collaborative. I would normally say that's too big a group, but on Zoom, it may actually work.
Would it make sense to do a presentation by the Affordable Housing Board and then do something with planning?
We can do it.
You could do either one. The planning board has been reviewing the work product that the Affordable Housing Collaborative produced. They have been working in serial, but they've been working on the same products. You've got your cottage zoning regulation, the affordable, the accessory dwelling units regulation and proposed program, which is actually, the program is more Affordable Housing Collaborative. The zoning that the zoning changes are being proposed, will be proposed by the planning board. So they're working on the same projects in regard to affordable housing.
So it makes sense to have them be together so that.
Yep.
But I think they probably we need a night specific to that. This is a much bigger discussion than an hour.
Yep.
So if we're going to do the affordable housing and the planning board together, let's schedule its own session.
So what about the first week of February for a standalone work session? So that first week would be the first Monday.
You just scheduled the goals and objectives on
the
Monday,
1st,
February
right.
1st.
You could do Groundhog Day, February 2nd.
Tuesday doesn't work.
Okay. Wednesday, the 3rd has no conflicts at this point. And Thursday, the 4th is not going to work, I think. Well, maybe.
So maybe in the spirit of consistency, the Wednesday is
Our work session days.
Folks can get used to, maybe there's something happening at the council level on Monday and Wednesdays.
Yeah,
What if-
Wednesday works for me too.
I agree, Deb. I like the thinking. Because I think
Okay.
when it becomes a routine, people then know to come and tune in.
Absolutely. I agree.
So Wednesday, the 3rd at 7 o'clock. And that's a planning board, affordable housing, town council work session.
Yes. Yes. So I just have one request, Rob. Once we get all of this settled now, can we as a council and also posted to where the agendas are in clerk base is still 2020 meetings. So that needs a little bit of an update there. If we can get all of these special meetings on a page that I can print so that newspaper ad doesn't work for me.
Yep.
Copy and pasting that comes in some crazy kind of a format, right? So I've tried, but I really would like to see these special meetings posted somewhere and also like in one format, because right now we can't see February's meetings yet, right?
Yeah.
And sent to the council and also posted to that agenda page if possible.
Yep.
Thank you, Deb, for bringing that up. I was lacking that. I need that too.
Yeah, we are painfully aware of the fact that COVID has stressed our digital publication mechanisms. We're really struggling right now to upgrade all of our mechanisms. We've had huge trouble with ClerkBase. We've had difficulty with maintaining the meeting notices and that sort of thing. We're going to have to do some significant revamp of our digital publication environment. We're in the process of doing it now. We're hoping, honestly, that the phone app, the smartphone app, is going to help us quite a bit because the developer of that phone app tells us that it should serve as a single point of publication to multiple channels. We're hoping that it lives up to that billing. So over the course of the next month or so, we're hoping to get everything sort of squared away. It's been a bit of a mess.
Deb, if I can just explain a little bit, I have to post council meetings as they are scheduled onto the town's website in the calendar. We do not send special meeting schedules to ClerkBase. We send them the agendas as the meetings are posted, and people can go to the town website and look at the calendar and click to link directly to the agenda. But obviously ClerkBase doesn't get that information on special meetings until we actually post an agenda. They do have the schedule for 2021. I believe I sent that to them. For the regular, meetings.
2020 is still there. The regular meeting schedule for 2020 is still there. But I mean, that's an easy one, right? We're second and fourth. We understand that. I think that, the special meetings. So if we can't do ClerkBase, then we can put a, look at this PDF link on the website, right?
It is on the calendar of the town website. All of these meetings that we've just scheduled are already on there. I'm going to have to go on and add some and cancel tomorrow night's meeting and reschedule it. So that will show up, but the calendar does have the new meetings as you schedule them. So that's a good place to look for them.
And it's Colleen. I just wanted to jump in because we were talking about that today, last couple of days. And we were thinking perhaps on the town manager's report that Rob gives each Thursday afternoon, would it be helpful to the council for us to email that report to the council members? We could post it on ClerkBase, but if we emailed it to the council, then you would see it, you would know then it's going to be posted or it has been posted. All of the documents would be attached to ClerkBase, but you would actually see the report. And then Rob thought maybe we could even list the upcoming meetings on that report so that you'd have them in one place, at least to start for now, an interim until the mobile app gets up and running. If that's helpful, we could certainly do that.
I think that would be really helpful. Thank you.
That would be helpful. I was wondering if it's worth it to put it on the meeting agendas, the town council meeting, the list of the meetings, so that the public is, when they're looking at the January 11th meeting, they're seeing, oh, these are the next, 8 days worth of meetings or 9 days worth of meetings. That then they could then go to the website and get the agenda, but at least they would know this is, planning board's meeting on Thursday, the 7th. It's hard to know that. You're on mute.
Yeah, that's what the manager's report has.
They are on there, yeah.
Right.
I know,
It's on the manager's
but
report.
the public isn't getting that. So the,
Yes, they are. The manager's report is on the agenda.
yeah,
It's attachment.
okay.
It's a kind of a few clicks in, you're
So,
right. Maybe
Again,
I'll
everything,
put
it
something on the
seems like
front.
it's always a struggle
Yeah.
to get there, right? And it shouldn't be a struggle. It should be very easily accessed.
If they look at the calendar on the town's web
Yeah,
page,
I
it
can
would have
see it.
all the upcoming meetings listed in a calendar format, and then you can select to go to that meeting.
They do, but if you look at that, I use that calendar and then it says, click here for the agenda. And you're thinking you're gonna click on a PDF.
Right.
And then you get back to the file directory and then you have to know to drill down to get to what you need. So
Yeah.
It is very confusing to access. And,
We are-
and we know what we're looking for and it's still confusing.
Yes.
We are painfully aware of this. We really are trying to figure out how to clean up the whole digital environment. It is just, it pains me. We started this conversation a year ago. COVID sort of really did throw us for a loop on some of the things that we were going to do. We're back at it in earnest about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I'm very hopeful that over the next couple of months, and it will take some time, we're going to be able to strip out some of the noise that keeps people from finding what they're looking to find. And I don't want to get deep into this, but I will say this. If you go to almost any large state's website now, when you type in ohio.gov or vermont.gov, what you find is a dialog box. I want to find blank. And everything is search. There's no huge, massive directories anymore because the internet just broke. I mean, the web design models of the early and mid 90s just aren't working as well as they used to, and we need to modernize our entire digital environment. The scheduling piece in particular has been frustrating, and we need to fix it. And we also have sort of legacy systems on our side that don't snap together well. Clerkbase is literally a handoff. We email somebody something, they retype it into a database. It's literally a person intervenes. It's not where we need to be yet.
All right. I appreciate this conversation very much, but I'm going to channel my Mike Ursillo and say that we're not really discussing scheduling meetings anymore, and we're into discussions of policy here, which are not advertised. So we should refrain from that until we get to our goals and objectives or something else. One thing in terms of scheduling that goals and objectives meeting, if it is possible to actually give us a sneak preview of the work product from the Affordable Housing Collaborative for that goals and objectives meeting, I think that would be good for that discussion, and also to have us prepared for the Wednesday following that.
Yeah.
What time did you want to start that meeting on Wednesday with planning and affordable housing? 6:30 or 7?
I think we were saying 7 to be consistent.
7's good. All righty. Those were all the meetings that we were thinking of. Point. All right, very good. Well, I think
Just one question. Sorry, Abel. So the fact that we're not going to have a meeting tomorrow night with the CIP, how does the public find that out? That we've just decided on 18 hours notice that we're not having a meeting that we advertised for a month?
So we will post to this Zoom address a notice. When people log in, they will find that the meeting has been rescheduled for, and we'll put the new scheduled date.
Okay, can we update any other area so that the person doesn't log in at 5:55 and be, I rearranged my whole day or whatever?
We
Yeah.
will
Because-
have to put it on the town's website at the meeting notice, and I also have to cancel it on the Secretary of State's website, and I have to cancel the physically posted notice at the town hall and the library.
Okay.
Can,
Because I
can
just-
we also push it out on the town Facebook page? Because I mean, Facebook is a huge, people are looking at it all the time. And I think you're going to reach a vast majority of people by doing that.
We can do that.
I just feel there might be some person who had their heart set on saying something tomorrow night. So,
So we'll do a Facebook notice, we'll put it on the webpage, and we'll put up a notice in Zoom at this address, so anyone who does log in, and we'll do that 15 minutes ahead of the meeting.
All right. And with that, I think we have exhausted our agenda in this discussion of scheduling meetings. So I will say that this meeting is now over. It's been a pleasure. I will see some of you tomorrow night, I guess. Have a good evening.
Good night.
Good night.
take care.